Yes, we can.
Yes, thank you. Yep.
Brilliant. So, yeah, my name's Ann Beavis, Head of Sustainable Development for Crown Workspace, as Julie has said, and I've worked in the waste and environment sector for about 15, 20 years, originally working in waste management, but in the last 10 years working with organisations who are seeking to move to more sustainable business models. Today, I'm going to briefly talk you through, more details about Crown Workspace, the organisation that I'm working with. I'm going to give you some practical examples about what we've been doing in this space, and also introduce some other concepts for people looking to make practical improvements in the workplace and at home. So for those of you who don't know Crown Workspace, we're an organisation who support businesses who are moving and changing the workplace, with a whole range of services, everything from interior refurbishment, actual physical moves. At the moment, we've been mainly working with organisations trying to make their workplace COVID secure, but we do this underpinned by a set of sustainable principles and facilities and services to help make this as sustainable and circular as possible. When I was approached to work with Crown, or who used to be known as Premier Workplace Services 10 years ago, as someone who's worked in waste historically, my approach was to sustainable development was to look at the waste hierarchy, because looking at waste prevention and minimisation as principles for a strategy for more sustainable outcomes had proved successful in other models that I developed. And in workplace change, mainly the sort of relocation side, the biggest waste problem was assets, office furniture and IT. And we found by simply having a range of services that help people understand what they were getting rid of and the value in it better, we were able to move to more circular outcomes. So we made auditing these assets in the first place a service, which might seem quite basic, but actually when people had an understanding of the assets they were getting rid of, they could find internal use for them, maybe at a different office, maybe somewhere else. A key part then of helping them to be more sustainable and circular is really around realising the financial value that still stayed in the assets that they had. Julie referenced earlier the loss of value in the assets of electrical items in the home. Well, there's huge loss of value in office furniture, IT in the workplace when people simply throw it away. So we've built resale channels for both office furniture and IT that try and present used items back into the marketplace to make them quality and desirable items. You can see some screenshots there, hopefully, of what the websites for office and IT resale look like. But actually, it's by having some exchange of, some financial exchange from what we do, giving back some money to the people that bought the assets in the first place, that actually can attract their interest sometimes and think, well, actually, this isn't just sustainable, it's saving money. Another key area that we've worked on is about enabling the donation of workplace assets to be more feasible. There's often in the workplace people think, well, I want to give something away, but finding someone who wants what you want to give away and can collect it at the same time can be quite challenging. So we've got a donation initiative called the Giving Back Project, where we work proactively with charities, schools and social enterprises to try and make the match between those getting rid of assets and those who need them. And I'll touch on that a bit later. Another key part or service intervention that we've developed is manufacturing capability around office furniture and IT. Quite often people are getting rid of assets for what I would call superficial reasons. Perhaps they fancy desks with different coloured tops, or maybe need them slightly smaller. Maybe they're reorganising their workplace to be a different size. And we found clients with just throwing these items away and buying new, when actually we can convert their existing assets or somebody else's waste assets into what they're looking for. We've developed the Renew Centre in North London, and it's a remanufacturing and refurbishment facility. We have over 15 full-time staff working there now, and there's a great range of skills. There's a really strong social and financial story there as well. Everybody that works there is highly skilled, well-trained, well rewarded, but actually the furniture that people were throwing away as waste comes to us and goes out looking, in my mind, as good as new. And that's part of the challenge of the circular economy, is to recognise the value in assets that we're getting rid of, but also present them in a way that makes them desirable for someone else. So all of those items on the screen at the moment were someone else's waste, and hopefully you can agree that they don't look like that now. So that's what we've been involved in predominantly over the last 10 years. In the last 3 or 4 years, the biggest area of growth for us has been around IT and audiovisual equipment refurbishment, reuse and repair. And everything that we've talked about in terms of furniture, the donation and the reselling, and then the refurbishment, we carry out all of those activities for our IT assets. And actually, Gerrard, who's going to speak a bit later from QSA actually helped us develop this business model and helped give us some of the advice, because although we'd carried out this process for furniture, this was a much more challenging area. There were all the considerations around data eradication, and it's not easy setting up the logistics for take back and reuse, but the value is really there. It just takes sort of a desire to do things differently, and also some sort of proactive approach. And actually, in terms of IT repair, refurbishment and giving back, I was lucky enough to work with Julie in JLL on one of our first donation initiatives. Julie recognised there were people in the JLL estate who had redundant assets, and there were also homeless charities that needed those assets. And by pairing up all of us together, we were able to take IT assets, get them refurbished securely, get all the data eradicated, happen efficiently, and then get them ready to give back to the homeless charities. On a larger scale, we've recently carried out a circular approach to a big workplace change project for JLL in Manchester, where there was a very large office closure and a new office being opened. And by taking the approach that we've just talked about, looking at what can be resold, looking at what can be donated, and collaborating in a really open way, we were able to achieve over 90% reuse of the assets. And as you can see on the slide there's financial return to JLL. There is significant environmental savings from waste that's now gone back into reuse. And also there's a really good social value story. I think we estimated something like £30,000 worth of social value was given back in partnership with Business to Schools in the Giving Back project. So there's these kind of changing the way we look at the assets in the workplace. We've found service interventions that are sustainable and circular that can deliver much better outcomes. And here are just some other examples of some really good practice out in the workplace that I've come across. We find that when people are moving or changing, it seems a really good time to change the way we think or have different interventions. Because at that time you tend to be making procurement decisions, and you can maybe look at the thought process that you're running about what it is you're trying to do. It doesn't mean to say you can't make changes straight away if you're so minded to, but it does tend to be quite a natural point when people are making quite a lot of procurement decisions. And if we start to apply the approach of, well, do we need to buy something in the first place? Can it be sourced sustainably? Is there a used or refurbished item that we could buy instead? And what are the sustainable inputs to the materials that we need? And then when you're looking to get rid of other products, can it be something else that someone else can reuse in some way? Is there an economic or social value to it? So on the screen, you'll see there is there's a website, Enviromate. That's a wonderful platform that's been developing in recent years, where people buy and sell their leftover building materials. Now, it may not be that you carry out your own refurbishment, but when you're writing a tender or a specification for someone to refurbish your office, perhaps you can start to ask them about what their plans are for using sustainable materials and for reusing the materials at the end of it. There's a product there, eCore, which is a fantastic product that I'd been starting to look at as an alternative for desktops for when we're remanufacturing. Unfortunately, COVID squashed that project at the moment, but their products are made from waste. Remanufactured paint is a fantastic. The picture there is Seagull's paint remanufacturing plant that I visited in Leeds at the end of last year. You know, you can ask people that are refurbishing on your behalf to perhaps look at making sure waste paint goes into a paint remanufacturing operation, which are usually social enterprises, so there's added value there. Or also, can you specify paint that's come from a waste source in the first place? They can pretty much colour match anything and make it up from waste paint from other projects. Similarly, we've got Greenstream. They're a fantastic social enterprise who are able to take back carpet tiles, refurbish them and resell them as part of a training and social enterprise service. And another of my favourites there is Interface, who, you know, have got real strong sustainability track record and are looking and have products that are made from fishing nets that have been found in the ocean. So if you start to have a mindset about actually we want to do things differently, there are a lot more practical differences you can make just with the procurement decisions that you get involved in. Some points of reference, and that I sit on with JLL and many other organisations. I sit on the Business and the Community Circular Economy Task Force, and actually a couple of years ago we put together this circular office guide. I believe it's on their website, but it's got a whole list of other practical initiatives and approaches you can take. And similarly, Crown Workspace have put together our own white paper on circular economy principles in the workplace. So I'll chuck that link in the chat in a moment, but there's a whole guide there of different things that you can do that hopefully will be helpful for you. But the point is, we're all working from home now, and a lot more of us are you know, having to try and cope with being sustainable in the workplace, which is our home place as well. So I thought I'd put together some of my favourite swaps and initiatives that I'm involved in or that I'm interested in, just because I think, you know, sometimes we feel we can look at things around climate change and feel that we're powerless to do anything, but actually we're not. We all have power to influence and procure. So it would be remiss of me not to put in our own home worker packages there from Crown Workspace, but on our Office Resale website we put together some really good packages of reused and remanufactured office furniture and equipment. There's some cleaning material there from iron and velvet. I mean, if you, in that tiny box, I get dissolvables delivered every month, and they just go into an existing container and add water. It's a fantastic sustainable alternative to going out and buying loads of, you know, single-use plastics full of cleaning properties. Similarly, there we've got Soap Folk. This is a recent change I've made, but these are waste offcuts of soap, really lovely, palm oil free as well. So for people that recognise the wider environmental impacts of what they're doing. And probably my favourite swap, because these are things that we need in the workplace. We all have toilet facilities. About who gives a crap? It's they're fantastic and sustainable toilet paper alternatives. You know, made from recycled content or from bamboo, and they're delivered straight to your door. These sorts of procurement decisions make a massive difference, but also so's the energy that we buy and use. I changed a while ago to have a air source heat pump, which is a picture there on the right hand side. I'm not a very technical person, and I couldn't even tell you exactly how they work, but it feels much better when I know the energy that we're getting is sustainable. And if you look here, the final picture there on there is the National Grid app, which is a fantastic app that I only downloaded in the last couple of weeks. But it tells us at any given time the energy mix of the country and the renewable sources it's from. And it also tells you when energy is greenest. So if you've got workplace assets that need recharging, you can choose the time of day to do it when actually the energy is most likely to be from renewable sources. And these are just a few other final options I'll leave you with. You know, part of the circular economy is making assets last for longer. The Fix-It website is fantastic. You know, we don't need to throw everything away. It can be repaired. We've got there also, that's my local charity shop, Haven House. I mean, when you're at home and working from home, you live a different sort of life, and to support the economy, you need to put inputs and outputs. So, ensuring that things are taken for donation, or that you actually buy items on something like Depop or another app, or Rapuni, they're a fantastic organisation. I bought some T-shirts from them in the summer, and I'd be able to send them back for them to be made into new T-shirts when they've been worn. And one of the latest trying there is Flow. That's a subscription-based toothpaste alternative. And toothpaste and toothbrush, and what I really like with what they've done, they're working on their sustainability journey, but what they're doing is making a really superior product. And that's really important in this area, that if people are going to switch to more sustainable and circular products and services, then they need to feel like they're not having an experience that's inferior, because that way they stay using sustainable and circular solutions because they feel very happy with the products and services they've got. So they're just a few of my personal recommendations that I think you can embrace in the home and the work from home. And I'm hoping that the information I've shared has been useful for you. I know there's going to be questions at the end. I believe my time is up, so I'm going to stop sharing now. And I'm going to have the pleasure to handing over to someone who I know is vastly experienced and knowledgeable in this area. And as I say, to have the expertise of QSA when we were developing our circular economy models. So I'll hand over to Gerrard Fisher, who will be talking about what he's up to.
Thank you very much, Anne. Hi, everyone. So my name is Gerrard. I'm from an organisation called QSA Partners. We're a small team of experts who specialise in delivering circular business models. Hopefully you can see my slides as well. There's only 4 of us in the business, but all we do is help businesses transition from a circular linear model to a circular business model. And there's 2 ways of doing that. One is as a client, so maybe you're asking for a circular service to be provided to you. The other one is as a supplier, so perhaps you're trying to develop a new circular offer to put on the market. And I'm going to talk through a little bit about how you go about doing that. There's 2 things you need. If you're going to climb Everest, you need a map and a team of Sherpas. Hopefully today we'll talk a bit about the map. QSA act as the Sherpas in the journey. So why do we believe in circular business models? Well, obviously everybody's heard of climate change and the global changes in temperature. I think what's quite useful to flag up, if we overlay England's temperature changes over the same time as global temperature changes, just at this last few years, although we are seeing warming in England, I'm not sure we're quite seeing it in the same way as the rest of the globe is seeing it. So perhaps we are slightly under experiencing climate change here compared to other places. And there is new evidence coming out that indicates climate change is accelerating rapidly, and it's a serious issue, and it's going to have global consequences that we're not quite feeling at the moment. So just bear that in mind. That's a really good reason to start changing your practices sooner rather than later. And some of the tips Anne has given you do all make a contribution to reducing climate change. The other reason that I mention that is a report that came out last year from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation that explained all of the work to switching to renewable energy is very positive and very powerful, but energy consumption is only about half the picture. The other half of our climate impacts is driven by the products that we manufacture and that we use. So it's really, really important that the materials and products that we're using are also reduced, that we stop consuming so much virgin material and product and we start reusing more and more. That is going to have a massive impact on climate change in the future too, as well as switching to renewable energy. With that in mind, there's a lot of different product areas that we can look at, whether it's clothing, whether it's cities and buildings and the items that we put in those buildings, whether it's the transport and mobility systems and infrastructure that we build, the number of cars we put on the road, or the electrical and electronic products that we use in our daily lives at home and at work. And obviously Julie mentioned the quantity that we're getting through in the UK. It's quite phenomenal. When you see a waste treatment facility and see what a few tons of waste electricals looks like, it's quite a scary thing. So where do we start? What are the right circular business model options for me right now? If you're sat thinking about implementing a model now, which one do you choose and why? Well, there's quite a wide range of business model options. And the first of them is to develop products that have a longer life, so they're durable. You could argue this is one approach that perhaps Apple takes a bit more than other brands at the moment with electronic products. It guarantees that products last a certain amount of time, but it provides support to those devices for a very long period of time. So you'll see Apple devices last 5, 6, 7 years through operating system updates, where you might see other platforms not quite give that level of support. So that's one example in a high-tech turnover market where you see a longer life. But with things like furniture and assets inside the buildings, you get ultra durable products that you can repair, as Anne has shown, remanufacture, refurbish, and extend their life for 10, 20 years. If they're not using energy, there's no energy efficiency to worry about. If you can make a durable product, you can make it last. Once you've got that in place, that you can harness the value of that longer life, and the simple step to take is then to start trading that product. So you might buy it back from customers and resell it. You'd refurbish it, improve it, remanufacture it, or you might encourage your customers to trade with each other. And this is called peer-to-peer trading. That can be a cheaper option to get into at first, and it saves you having to get involved in those transactions. But typically businesses find this step easiest because it's very similar to their current business model. It's a buy and sell transaction the way they're used to doing it. Stepping on from there, you might look at hiring and leasing products. So once you've got your head around you're buying and selling an item for a limited period of time, then you begin to think, well, why am I selling it at all? Why don't I just keep ownership and let my customer use it for a certain period of time and charge them for that period of use? Now, again, that's another step in how your business works. You begin to think about how many assets do I have? What utilization rate do I have? What's my lease income from that asset base that I'm running? But equally, you might also encourage your customers to share and hire among themselves and to share that value. And it's all about accessing unused value. So you may have assets in your workplace that you don't utilize all the time. Perhaps a business next door to you can use those assets. And you can share the value and the cost of that, which is a way of saving money as well as reducing how many resources you need to support all your businesses. And then finally, you may move to a complete service model. So that's where your customer is buying the outcome that you deliver rather than the item. So if you take the example of the air source heat pump that Anne mentioned, you might buy the temperature outcome in a building rather than buying a heat pump, so to speak, or even leasing a heat pump. The person would deliver the outcome to your facility. Now, that's quite hard to conceptualize. There is already a model running called pay per lux. So Philips will sell you light. You buy then the amount of lux that is in your workplace, and they worry about what is in the ceiling magically delivering that light to you and how much that costs to run. You're paying for the light. They worry about how they deliver that to you. So that incentivizes them to give you light in the most efficient way, the most energy efficient and the most resource efficient way. And then suddenly all your incentives are lined up very well. You want lower cost, they want to deliver everything to you at lowest cost to them as well. Now, service models are really hard to get to. I won't beat about the bush. It's quite a journey to get there, but if you can get there, you tend to be creating more value, and you develop better customer relationships. And so you tend to lock customers into your business offer rather than them changing to someone else's service. And I'll explain why. So when you're implementing a business model, you need to think about the process you're going to use. And it's a fairly standard process. You can see in any change management books, there's an innovation process and going through feasibility assessment and then working out a business case. But actually, it's really important that you spend a good amount of time on each of these steps and that you do these steps in order. We've worked with a number of companies, and whenever we've seen people skip a step or sort of fast track one of them and take some assumptions, it often comes to bite them later on in the process. So it is definitely worth taking time on each of these steps. The preparation, understanding the context of your current situation and where the market is going, particularly now with COVID. Taking time to innovate thoroughly and think about all the possible options that you could deliver, and working out the feasibility on a couple of those that are looking most promising. But then really understanding the business case, because if this isn't a commercially viable model, it's not going to run and there's no point taking it any further. So really be rigorous about the business case and make sure your finance team is supportive of the business case you're presenting to your funders. Do a trial, ideally on a small scale, ideally with a customer that is safe and trusting of what you're doing. And then once you've got feedback from that trial, then you understand the full business case and you can scale up and replicate and make sure you gather learning from that process, so you can go back to the beginning and look at the other innovations you had and think, well, maybe now we can do another step on this process. And so actually you'll go round and round this process, but do make sure that you implement a clear process and you understand where you are on it. The other consideration that framework that we've come up with is what we call the 7 C's of circular business. And this is often something that people overlook. They talk about product design and how designers enable the circular economy. We would argue that the customer enables the circular economy. If you don't have a valid offer to give to your customer, you're not going to get anywhere at all. They are your hero, they're why you're in business, obviously. And so making sure you understand exactly what you need is really the most important thing. And again, reflecting back on Ann's examples, examples like Depop, which is a clothing trading platform. We've worked with clothing retailers, and you can obviously understand they know how to get the customers to buy clothing. But when you say, how big is their wardrobe and what do they do with clothes when they're finished with them, they don't know. They don't know their customer, in short. And so they struggle to deliver a service to the customer rather than just sell clothes at them all the time. So the customer is absolutely key in all of this. The other 6 C's, they're all important. I think the most important of the others would be the commercial case at the top. As I said before, if you can't make money from this, it's not going to be viable at all. It might be an environmental project, but it's not a business model. So commercial case is important. You must be coherent with your business strategy. You've got to make sure you're aligning with where your business thinks it wants to go. That is becoming easier and easier as businesses become more environmentally aware and focused. But you still need to give your project a good home commercially within your business. You need to secure commitment from your colleagues and your sponsors. You need everybody to collaborate within your business and in your supply chain, because there will be other supply partners that are critical to implementing this business model. Change is a roller coaster of a ride. Change management is absolutely vital in this. So understanding how your business is changing, how your market is changing, and how your whole company may need to adapt to this new business model is important. And finally, amongst all of that, you've got to remember that you are trying to implement a circular business model. It's easy to go around this process and actually end up doing something that's worse for the environment. So make sure you're continually checking that circularity is still at the core of what you're delivering. So as you're going through this process, these 7 steps, you've actually got to implement each of these 7 C's across the whole process. So there's quite a lot to bear in mind as you go through this process. And what I'm going to do in just a moment is show you we're developing a learning platform to try and help guide you through all of these different considerations. And I'll just showcase that in a moment. But if you'd like to get in touch after this event, by all means, get in touch with us, hello@qsapartners.co.uk, and we'll be happy to take you through a bit of our thinking. So with that in mind, I'm just going to give you a quick sneak preview. We're building a learning platform. So this runs through those 7 process steps that I talked about. Explains the 7 C's. So we explain a few things about why you might want to change your circular model. We explain a bit more context on each of these 7 C's, and you can step through this learning process bit by bit. And we're actually building a parallel model where you'll be able to have a discussion with us about the stage that you're at and what you're learning so far and how you're implementing your process. So, you might be at the preparation stage, and we'll guide you through, the most important things to bear in mind here. And then we'll provide documentation to help you understand how to track your progress. And you can use our services to help you review that. Again, we can look at feasibility, for example, and we share with you some of the learning we've had from some of the project. So hopefully you can learn from the path that others have trod rather than having to explore it on your own without any experience at all. But I'll leave that there, and hopefully, Julie, you might have some questions for us.
Well, thank you so much, Gerrard. That was really, really informative, and to you as well, Anne. Brilliant examples of what can be done in what really can be quite a complicated marketplace for people to get their heads around. So we now know that by thinking differently and by doing it differently, we can actually get some service interventions that can be delivered in the workplace and in the home environment. So I'm thought that I would, as someone that invited you to come along, take the initiative and ask you a couple of questions, if you don't mind. My first question, so Anne, from your experience, can you recommend a good starting point for companies to begin to practice circularity in their business?
Yeah, I think, obviously Gerrard's just mapped out, the approach that they follow in terms of identifying and mapping for a business that wanted to move on. And I would fully agree with that. I think you have to, I think what business owners now are, the situation they're in is recognize you can't carry on business as normal. So I would say the most important thing is to have a desire for change. Because if you don't have a desire and appetite for change, then actually it can be very hard to make and implement a circular approach. And so I would say the real starting point is for an organisation to reflect on what it is they're doing. I watched a webinar this morning, and I think it was a sustainability manager from John Lewis who said, our approach now is if we don't know where something comes from and we don't know what happens to it at the end of the life, then we shouldn't be selling it. And that's clearly become a core principle for how they're shaping what they're doing. So I think an organisation starting point is to have that honest reflection about what it needs to achieve and recognise that that will take effort, time, investment, some loss, but actually, the sort of businesses that are going to be around in 10, 15, 20 years time aren't the ones that are linear, because that we've, for the reasons that Gerrard explained and for all the reasons that you see in anything that covers climate change, how business as usual as it is currently is not the business models of the future. So that's the starting point for me, Julie, a real reflection on what it is you want to be known for as an organisation, what it is you want to achieve, and getting that commitment at the top level, and then start the mapping and auditing process to say, OK, what are our inputs? What are our products? Where do we generate waste? And to start the whole process similar to as Gerrard's outlined in the approach QSA take.
Excellent advice. Thank you, Anne. Gerrard, I'm not going to let you escape. So it was absolutely brilliant what you took us through. Really enjoyed the presentation. We haven't mentioned COVID-19, and that we should make reference to it today. So do you see COVID-19 as a catalyst that will escalate circular economy or a hindrance? I'd be interested on your thoughts on that.
It's obviously going to have a short-term impact on all businesses. So in some respects, it is a hindrance to any business. I think what we're seeing, and we released a blog on this quite recently, we're seeing circular businesses and businesses with shared systems recover quicker because they are less reliant on an extended supply chain that might span across the globe. So again, back to the example that Anne provided with Depop, that their business model is to trade on assets that already exist in the marketplace. Those haven't gone anywhere, and so people keep trading them. As soon as trade picks up, they're there to harvest that business. One of my colleagues runs a mobility service, a car sharing, bike sharing service. Again, as soon as lockdown lifted, their assets are on the ground and they're up and running again, arguably busier than before, with a slightly different client mix and usage pattern, but they can respond immediately. The downside to that is when things like lockdown do happen, you're sat with arguably a large asset fleet that isn't deployed, but then you're no different to anyone who's got a massive supply chain suddenly frozen in warehouses across the world anyway. So I think COVID will ultimately mean that circular businesses are at a slight advantage in future.
I think that there's definitely a direction of travel here, isn't there, that people really have to think very seriously about taking this by the reins and actually doing something, because if it's not done, then those businesses will be left behind, and a linear economy is not the way forward. So if I may, just final question to both of you, and Anne, if you could go first, that would be brilliant. Do you have a favourite circular economy project, and if so, what is it?
I was thinking about this last week actually, Julie, because I've been asked to speak at an event for libraries about circular economy. And it made me realise that libraries are probably the most circular economy business there is out there, or one of them. And it made me think about, they're at the heart of the community. They have assets in them, maybe books or records or other resources, and they facilitate the constant reuse of them. And yet, in effect, they've been underinvested in, and face more in recent times, and yet they exist. They have the building in the community, they have a process for sharing assets out. So circularity has existed for a long time. I grew up in a world where things got repaired and shared. As the youngest of three, most of my clothes had gone through 2 other people before they came to me, and perhaps even neighbours. So I don't feel whilst technology is a great enabler and all sorts of inventions are enabling circular economy to become more prevalent, I actually think there's some really good examples of where circular economy exists in already and can be enhanced and built. So I'm going to say libraries for this, because I really like what they do and think they could also be a strong part of the solution going forward.
I think you're so right. I think that's a great example. Gerrard, can I ask the same question of you?
Yeah, you can ask the same question. We've worked on so many different things. We worked from high-tech electronics through furniture, medical equipment. We've even proven there's a business case for recycling human waste that's better than just chucking it down the sewer. So you can find value anywhere would be a key lesson. I think my favourite would probably have to be the work we did with a company called Bandvolk, which is a tyre retreading and remanufacturing business, or was. We helped them switch to become a company that sold tyres as a service. So their customers paid for miles instead of buying tyres. And in fact, that was so commercially successful, they got bought out by Continental. Because effectively they got something like 2/3 of the UK freight tyre market with that offer. So if you get this right, the commercial opportunities are massive, and I think that would be the reason why that's my favourite.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Before we go, I'll just check with Ali if there are any other burning questions that people have raised. If not, of course, we can always answer any questions offline. We'll make sure that whether they're directed at ourselves, JLL, or at Anne or Gerrard, that those questions are answered. Ellie, any further comments that you'd like to make?
There's no further questions, but if anyone does have any, they can just unmute themselves now, or just write a question in the chat box, but I don't think there was any at this point. But yeah, it was really interesting. Thank you both.
Okay, so what I'd like to say, if there are no questions, is a huge thank you to the very charming and delightful Ann Beavis and Gerrard Fisher. You've been great speakers. We've had some lovely comments made, and I very much hope that going forward we can all put our thinking caps on to circular economy. What can we do in our workplace and at home? And if anybody would like to consider further conversation, then our laptops and our phones are always open. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'd like to maybe go back to a pre-COVID world and show in our traditional manner. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for hosting.
Thank you. Very good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.